Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to the Cloudology channel. Back in the saddle today. I know I left you guys um, last week. Got a little busy last week. It was a pretty busy week, and not to mention, I realized that my last stream, I said I was gonna show you Ansible and how it works. Turns out it's a little bit more of a task. Than I had anticipated. So I'm going to do a pre-recorded video for that one because I just think the format's going to be a lot better. It's going to be a lot easier to understand, and I can make sure I get all my points across for Ansible because when you're using open source Ansible, it's a little there's a lot of configuration that needs to happen behind the scenes, and I want to make sure I include those details. But I digress. It's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about probably the reason you clicked on this video, which says software development sucks and why working in the cloud is better, or why cloud engineer or DevOps engineer or SRE or Linux admin, whatever, sysadmin is a better job choice. Now, that statement is completely my opinion. And it's not even a very accurate opinion because I've never professionally worked as a software developer ever. W2 wise, I've coded a few websites here and there. I've done it. I know the MERN stack pretty well. But that's just my opinion. But there's some points that I want to make as to why I think that cloud engineering or working in the cloud in some capacity is better than being a software developer. Obviously, the big one, the first one that everybody mentions, that everybody says is the cloud pays better. Being a cloud engineer typically, on average, pays better than being a software developer. And that holds true even at the highest levels. So I wish I would have pulled up the average salary between the two to compare, but I didn't because I didn't do my research before this stream. But typically, this is like a well-known. Well, I would think it's a well-known thing in the job market, right? So I believe the average salary for like a senior cloud engineer or senior DevOps engineer is somewhere in the tune of like, back when I was looking, it was like, I think the average salary was 130 or no, it was about $150,000 a year. Whereas senior software developer was somewhere around the 120, 130 range. I know that's probably old data because now with the way the job market's going and the way salaries are increasing in IT, that's probably way off base. And we probably don't even have the correct data for that right now. It was actually, I was reading the Stack Overflow, like job census that they do like every year. And that's actually where I found it. And that was a couple of years ago. So that information is probably completely out to date. But still, cloud engineering or DevOps engineering, typically the salaries pay a little bit more than your average software development. Um, Another reason why I think that cloud engineering or DevOps engineering or whatever you want to call whatever you work in the cloud in some capacity, I personally think is better than software development is most of the time, at least in my experience, you're working with a lot more senior people who have been in the IT industry for a longer period of time. There's not, very few cloud engineers or the DevOps engineers, especially, and especially SREs. Very few of those job titles are junior level because it requires a lot of knowledge and experience beforehand. So I definitely think people who work in the cloud work with, like they've been in the industry a little bit longer. And if you happen to get into the industry as a junior, I think the learning curve is kind of cut a little bit short because you're working with so many senior people. So you'll be working on a problem that you think is really hard, and then a senior guy comes over and is just like, oh dude, just do this. Like they just know ways around how to do things, and that's just kind of like the nature of the industry because they've been doing it for so long that they're just like, oh dude, yeah, check this out, you got to see this. And they do it with like 3 CLI commands, and you're like, what's going on? um, Another another thing I like about cloud engineering or working in the cloud in general is it's more independent. I wouldn't say independent work, but it's more of a kind of like set and forget mentality. Like you're given a task and they kind of just leave you alone. At least that's been my experience working in cloud. Pretty much every job I've been at, and everyone I know, it's kind of the nature of this side of IT. Um, and they kind of just assign you things. A lot of times I've been in jobs where they only have like weekly stand-ups. They don't even have like daily stand-ups. Um, because some of the projects or some of the tasks in cloud in general are very long and they're very drawn out, and it takes a longer time to kind of build the infrastructure behind some of this stuff. And what is up to Mr. Jeffrey the Pit with Bork Bork, my third favorite dog behind my own two dogs, of course. Um, but yeah, so it's more of like you're kind of left to your own devices. Now that could be good or bad depending on how you tend to work. I personally, I like being given work and being like, okay, here's what you have to do. Reach out if you need any help, but let us know, some progress on it or how far you get with it. So I personally like that style. I don't like, sitting on like a Zoom call all day and like walking me through and holding my hand on how to do all this stuff. Like, let me struggle a little bit. Let me figure it out. That's kind of how I learn. I think that's how a majority of people learn, to be honest. Another thing that is, I think, is very important, and that I noticed specifically. So, if you're in IT or you've been trying to get a job in IT, I'm sure you've noticed that there has been kind of a lull in hiring junior level people, right? Junior level, software developers, even junior level cloud engineers, right? So, the job market in IT kind of works in seasons, right? So, I don't know why it happens this way, but essentially companies spend a lot of the beginning and pretty much the beginning of the year hiring a bunch of people, and then towards the middle to the end of the year that slows down tremendously. Like that's just the cycle of it. So typically free advice here: if you're applying for a job, start laying the groundwork. As soon as you're ready to start applying, lay the groundwork for next year in the summer of the previous year. So for example, if you have been applying for any type of job in IT, starting like June, July, August, you're essentially laying the groundwork for that next year. I know it sucks that it works like that, but that's why you should always be, applying, always be applying throughout the entire year. Because honestly, one, a company might just be like, "Hey, we got to get somebody in here," and you might get lucky. And two, you're laying a lot of groundwork for these applications to sit in company systems. And then when they're ready to ramp up hiring again, they're going to go into their system and be like, look at all these people that applied last year. We should probably contact them now, because now we really need the help. Shout out to Get Money Coding. Yes, please smash like. So this is the Self-Taught Hustle channel has rebranded to Get Money Coding. Same fire content, different name, better name in my opinion. Good job on the name choice. But please go over to his channel. If you're new to software development and you don't want to take my advice and get into cloud, you should hit this guy up, and because he's going to tell you how to get money coding, as you can see by the username, Get Money Coding. So please check out his YouTube channel. Always motivates me for my streams. And every time I'm like, oh man, I don't think I want to stream today. All I got to do is watch my buddy Fido's streams right now, and then he gets me fired up. He makes me want to stream. Anyway, I digress. So yeah, free advice. Always be applying. If you're looking for a job, if you don't like the job you have now or whatever the case, always apply all the time, right? As much as you can. That way you're stacking that pipeline with applications. Companies are calling you, recruiters are reaching out to you, stuff like that. Always be pumping it out. You have to be. You have to be. Yeah, no problem. No problem. Anytime. So with that being said, I know I said there's a lull in the end of the year for hiring. It's just the nature of the beast, but One thing that didn't change is, so I kind of use this as a litmus test. I always get messages, emails. I get contacted by a lot of recruiters, especially specifically for cloud related things. So my LinkedIn profile is kind of all over the place. I don't really maintain it very well. Um, I have stuff on there for like software development. I have stuff on there for, cloud. I have like Web3 stuff on my LinkedIn. So I get hit up by like everybody. And by far the most I get hit up for by recruiters is for the cloud, for, some type of cloud related position, DevOps engineer, AWS engineer, GCP engineer, Terraform engineer, a bunch of different engineer buzzword names. Basically, they all mean the same thing. They all more or less want you to do the same thing, and that's work in the cloud. Um, Especially, there's a lot of higher demand, in my opinion, from what I've seen. Granted, I'm one source of information, so take it with a grain of salt, but I believe the demand for mid-level to like not necessarily junior, but maybe that like first or second year individual that's just getting into cloud. There's a lot more demand for that than there is for software development, and as far as the cloud goes. A lot of times, what I see is people want senior software developers, people want senior Java developers, or senior React developers, or project leads and stuff like that. Whereas the cloud, there's a good amount of entry level to mid-level positions available. So I personally think the demand is greater in cloud because nobody really understands the cloud. Like nobody knows how it works. Nobody really cares how it works, to be honest with you. Um, until they have to build something on the cloud and all of their stuff has been on premises, and they're like, oh damn, like we really need to switch this up and move it into the cloud. So then you get hit up and like, hey, we need like someone who's really good with the cloud to migrate all of our applications from our on-prem situation to the cloud, which typically doesn't work out very well, but hey, it's good money, right? It can be done. It just takes a lot longer than people think. Anyone that is familiar with the term lift and shift knows that it doesn't work very well. But I digress. It is a strategy. Another thing, kind of talking about that more availability for mid to senior level, is like I said, the cloud is difficult. It is difficult to do in the sense of like conceptualizing it, in my opinion. So it's not necessarily difficult to do the work. It's difficult to do the work correctly and securely, and it is difficult to do it cost effectively, and it is difficult to do it um, in a very specific way that the customer needs without too much excess. Too much excess permissions, too much excess cost, because that's another big thing too, is cost, which I don't know. I don't really know if developers necessarily deal with cost when it comes to building their applications. My thought, I mean, obviously, if you're like freelancing or if you're running your own business, obviously cost is something that comes into play, right? But if you're just like a W2 software developer, do you guys even worry about costs to implement a feature? Probably not. My guess would be no. It's probably not at that software developer's level to worry about cost. Whereas in the cloud, we always have to be cognizant of how much this stuff is going to cost, because not only do our services cost money, our skill costs money, but it also costs money to run what we are building for them. And so the more misconfigurations that happen and the more security things that happen, it's going to cost more money in the long run, right? So it is very daunting for people to, or companies in general, to kind of tackle on their own. So that brings me into my next point, is that it's a lot bigger of a breeding ground for consulting, in my opinion, because you got to think a lot of these companies build stuff on-prem, or they just throw stuff on AWS instances. There's no like processes that necessarily go, like they might have a process behind it, but it might not be as optimized as it could be. Maybe it's costing them a fortune and they're just like, dude, this cloud stuff is really expensive. We need to hire an expert that can fix our bill. You know what I mean? So I think consulting is really, it's a little bit more prevalent in the cloud engineering space, right? In my opinion, I don't really know how good the consulting market is in software development. Um, but I feel like everybody like knows how to code or thinks they know how to code or whatever the case may be. But I see consulting gigs all the time in cloud engineering, all the time. Like people will just randomly hit me up in on LinkedIn and be like, hey, like, can we just like get your opinion on this? Like, we'll pay you X amount of dollars an hour. I personally, I don't really like acknowledge them. But that says to me up here, if I ever wanted to do that in the future, there's definitely an opportunity um, to, you know, reach out to them and be like, hey, like I charge X amount an hour. Like, let me look at your cloud infrastructure. What are your goals? You know, all the stuff that goes with consulting. Um, and there's a lot more opportunity out there because most of the common mistakes that happen or the common pitfalls when it comes to cloud engineering is just the fact that it's misconfigured most of the time because again it's a complicated thing. It's, you know, AWS isn't exactly easy to navigate. If you've ever been into AWS console, you understand like I don't know how most of this stuff works. The average person looks at it as like I don't know how this stuff works. I'm just going to throw up what I need and hope to God it works. And that's kind of the approach a lot of the smaller companies take. And it gets them into trouble with billing, gets them into trouble with security. And that's where consulting comes into play for cloud engineering. And it's a thriving industry, in my opinion. Koinami, welcome. Welcome to the channel. I haven't seen you in here before. Spreading knowledge. I try my best, man. I try my best. I appreciate you dropping in and dropping a comment for me. So here's another opinion of mine. Granted, this is mostly opinion based, but this is just my observations in cloud. Is the work is a little bit more abstract, right? So with coding, I feel like there's still a visualization, like especially if you're like a front end developer, you can see what you're creating most of the time, or you can see you know, a database connection, obviously by testing, you know, the full stack, right, from front end to database and back. So with cloud, it's a little bit more abstract, and a lot of the stuff you're building, you don't necessarily see, and it might not work, and you might not get any errors if it doesn't work. Like sometimes it's just misconfigured, and there's no error to show you that it's misconfigured. It's just like, okay, well, this isn't working as expected, so now I got to go figure out why. But that leads to a more of a challenge. If you're like me, you enjoy things that are hard. You know, obviously going through it in the moment, you're like, man, this is difficult. I don't know if I can do this, like, et cetera, et cetera. But then you actually solve a very difficult problem. And I'm not saying software development is not hard. I'm not saying that. It is difficult. It's just a different type of difficulty. Like if you're a highly visual person, the cloud might be a challenge for you because there's not a lot of visualization with like networking, not a lot of visualization to security. There's not a lot of visualization to, you know, instances. So it's very difficult to kind of conceptualize these abstract details into something that actually works, is secure, and doesn't cost a fortune. So with all those components together, it is a more challenging industry from that aspect. Obviously, software development, like I said, comes with its own challenges. I'm not knocking anybody that's a software developer. Trust me, most of the people I know are software developers. Nobody works in cloud because it's the nerd job, I guess. But if you like a challenge, infrastructure in general might be your route, man. Like it can be a very challenging job, especially when you're working with stuff that is like, you know, not even that's like an alpha stage. You know what I mean? Like you're working with stuff that isn't even like fully developed yet, and you're trying to build an infrastructure with it, and things are changing constantly. You have to make updates. It's a lot of stuff. Most of that stuff happens like in the Web3 context, because most of that stuff is like vaporware. You're not even working with stuff that's not even real, or you're building your own components to kind of patch it together. But if you're up for a challenge and you're good with abstract, or you like abstract work that is difficult to conceptualize, you know, consider cloud for sure over software development. Another thing that, and probably my last point here, I wanted to keep this video pretty short, is when it comes to leveling up in cloud, right? In my opinion, now, again, you got to take it with a grain of salt. I've never been a W-2 software developer, so I don't, I haven't worked for a software development company for X amount of years, whatever the case may be. But I feel like the opportunity to jump into a more senior position is a lot more prevalent in cloud, for example. So you can enter the industry as maybe like a cloud engineer or an automation engineer, and if you really pay attention and you do your work and you understand this stuff really well, it's not far-fetched for you to jump into like an SRE position, which pays substantially more than like a cloud engineering position, or like a very base level, like entry level DevOps engineer. Typically SRE or site reliability engineer, basically they deal with like logging and monitoring and overall sustainment of the environment. That's kind of their wheelhouse, whereas like maybe DevOps is more of like um, development, so you're actually building new things and launching like new infrastructure and stuff like that. But it's not unheard of for someone to go from like an entry level position and then make the jump to like SRE, if they have their knowledge base down, and if they really are familiar with the systems that they build. It's an easy move, and that's an easy like 50 plus $1,000 jump. So it's not too far fetched to jump into that. And I think it's a little bit easier to progress in cloud engineering because nobody does it. Cloud engineering is not sexy like software development. If something could be sexy in IT, everybody wants to be like a software developer. Everybody wants to code. You know what I mean? Nobody cares about the infrastructure. Nobody cares what they code on. So there's not a lot of people that get into the industry, and people who have a ton of knowledge don't necessarily, there's not a lot of them going around. So those are my major points when it comes to my argument between software development and cloud engineering. Do you guys agree with me? Do you guys think that this is legit? Do you think that I'm way off base here? If you think I'm way off base, put it in the comments and I'll do a video about it. I'll message you about it. I don't care. But with that being said, guys, please feel free to like the video, comment if you disagree with me or if you agree with me, and don't forget to subscribe. Again, I do this every single Wednesday, 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time or 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I hope you guys have a good week. That's all today. Oh, sorry. One last thing. If you guys like anything involving like vehicles or working on cars or anything like that, I actually have another channel where I do exactly that. Right now, I'm building out a Toyota, an 80 Series Land Cruiser. And I'm just doing it as a fun and side project on the weekend. If you guys want to check that out, I'm going to put the link in my description. The name's already in the description. It's called Motor Mouse Garage. Check that out if you're interested at all. But that being said, peace out, guys. I hope you guys have an excellent week and weekend, and I'll see you next week.